Well, we're going to migrate right now to the introduction. So I am Tom Gimacello. I'm a board member of the Green Mountain Audubon Society. I'm very pleased to begin our presentation by introducing our presenter, Jim Andrews, who did his undergraduate studies at UVM and his master's at Middlebury. Jim is quite the active guy. He currently serves on a bunch of committees, including the advisory group to the Vermont Endangered Species Committee. He also coordinates the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas and serves as a research and teaching associate with Vermont Family Forests in Bristol. He's a founding member of the Salisbury Conservation Commission, and there are lots of other things that I could tell you in his curriculum vitae, but what's important is he's going to tell us all about the 8 species of turtles which live in Vermont. Jim has requested that he, in his presentation, will stop a few times and we will be able to take your questions. In order to get your questions to him, you have to type your questions into the chat, which you can activate on the bottom of your screen, and I'll take the questions in chronological order. So here tonight, as spring is arriving, we have Jim Andrews, who will present to us the turtles of Vermont. Take it away, Jim.
Hey, thanks for the introduction and good evening, everybody. Timing is perfect. I suspect that by the end of next week, we'll start getting some turtle reports of turtle sightings around the state as the temperatures warm up and the ponds melt and the turtles come to the surface to bask. Here in the title slide, I'll just tell you what you're looking at there. That's a wood turtle, and we'll get back to wood turtles in a little bit. They're a species that we may well have some of the best habitat in the world for that particular species. So let's see. I'll start with a turtle that you're probably pretty familiar with. This is one that most people have seen, and this is the painted turtle. And it's called painted for obvious reasons. I mean, you can see this beautiful reddish color underneath the margin here of this part of the shell, which is called the carapace. This bottom part of the shell is called the plastron. Here we're looking at the bridge between the carapace and the plastron, and I'll mention these parts of the turtle as we go along. But you see the beautiful red, you see red at the base of the neck, you see the yellow spots on the head. And this is a turtle that basks a lot, and it's one that basks in the open, out in the water, out of the water, not just in shallow water like snapping turtles usually do. So we see it often. And this particular one we're looking at is kind of neat in that you can see how really long the front claws are. And the front claws, if we compare them to the back claws, yeah, they're longer than the back claws. That tells us that this particular individual is a male. And that what they do with these long claws in the front is caress the necks of the females during courtship. And I don't know if you've ever seen any videos. There's some videos online that show that, where the male turtle gets in front of the female turtle and reaches out and scratches her neck in order to get her attention to mate. So here we're looking at the underside of the painted turtle, which we call the plastron. And I want you to notice something now. Each of these sections that we're looking at here are called scutes, and underneath the scutes or scales, you can see a yellow line, and that yellow line is where 2 bones come together underneath the scutes. So you'll see that the scute here is over the margins of the bones and helps hold the whole turtle together. It seals it all together tightly. As we move through these, let's see, taking me a little while here to advance. We're looking here at the carapace of an adult painted turtle. And we can see that it has a very, very smooth carapace. It doesn't have a keel, and we'll show you keels in the future. No keel here. And it's smooth all the way around the margins of the carapace. Some turtles have teeth on the posterior margin of the carapace, and that helps us identify that particular species. So painted turtles, in about, let's say, about 2 months from now, will be coming ashore and looking for places where there's very little plant cover, lots of open, loose soil. Often this could be your garden, compost pile, maybe a manure pile, maybe a sandy area of your lawn, or sometimes right in your lawn. But they're looking for an open place that gets lots of sun and where the roots of the vegetation are shallow so that they won't reach down into the eggs. So they lay their eggs in those places, and unusually among our turtles, those eggs will hatch in the fall, but stay in the ground. So they'll hatch, they're all lined up, facing upward, but they stay in the ground through the winter, and they emerge the following spring. Now, this is the turtle that's best known for that, but I'll mention some other turtles as we go along that may or may not make it through a winter. And some of that depends on how warm, how many degree day units we have over the course of the summer. So that could change over time as we see global warming's impact here in Vermont. So here we have a youngster. So it has emerged, a young painted turtle that has emerged the following spring. And you can see here where the yolk was attached, or the egg sac, so that when this turtle broke out of its egg, it still had some remnants of the yolk that it was surviving on attached to it. And that kept it alive, of course, over the first year underground. And it will probably keep it alive for at least a few weeks until it makes it to the shallow margins of open water. Let's see. So the range that we have on the painted turtle that we know of in our Atlas records, and these of course are records that people have been turning into us for the last 25 years, show that we have records from almost all the towns in the state of Vermont. And if you happen to see that you are from an area that is gray here, that means we don't have any records of painted turtles yet from your town. And if you could get a photo and send it in, you could be the first to document a painted turtle from your town. And that would be really helpful. And by send it in, I mean, and I'll show you the addresses at the end, either my email or through our website. Turtles, most turtles have something really pretty cool going on, and that's called temperature dependent sex determination, TDSD. And what that means is that the sex of the turtle is not determined genetically, but it's determined by the temperature of the eggs at a particular critical time in their development. So if the temperature is, let's say, above a certain temperature, it will be a female. If it's below, it may be a male. And that works differently for different species. so that some of them actually have maybe 3 or 4 layers, so that in one temperature range it's male, a little bit higher it's female, a little bit higher it's male again. But it's pretty interesting that with most of our turtles, it is the temperature of the eggs that determine the sex, which is another thing that we're a little concerned about then in terms of global warming and how that will skew sex ratios of turtles. I should point out while we're looking at this picture that 2 of these turtle eggs are rounded, which is the exception. Snapping turtles lay rounded eggs, and spiny soft-shell turtles lay rounded eggs, but all the rest of our turtles lay more oval eggs, shaped more like a bird egg. One of the turtles that we're fortunate to have in Vermont that you would not find anywhere else in New England is the map turtle. I'll talk a little bit more about the map turtle in a little while, but the map turtle loves to bask in these huge congregations. You can notice if you look carefully that most of these turtles look kind of a dull grayish green. But if you keep looking carefully, you'll see, oh, here's one that's kind of a shiny, almost black, very, very dark green. Here's another one. These 2 are painted turtles. All the rest are map turtles. What are these turtles doing out here basking? Is it like kicking back and taking in a little sun? Yeah, but it's a lot more important than that. As you probably know, turtles are solar heated. There's real advantages to that, but it does require that they get out of the water. At least some species actually bask by getting out of the water onto dry land, soaking up that sun, raising their body temperature. The body temperature wants to be somewhere in, let's say, the 80s, which that's their optimal temperature that will allow them to digest food. It will allow them to develop eggs, heal from injuries. At lower temperatures, that all of that is much slower to take place. And then, of course, there's a maximum temperature at which time they would have to return to the water and cool down, that they could be in trouble if they get too hot. So turtles, as you know, are ectotherms. You may have heard the term, which is a little bit misleading, cold-blooded. The reason we don't like cold-blooded is just that, you know, if they're basking, they're trying to get their temperature up into the 80s. So their blood is going to be close to the temperature of a mammal's. But it does vary, and they get their temperature, therm, from the outside. So ecto rather than endo. They get their heat from the outside. But there's some tremendous advantages to that. And that is that we as mammals and birds have to eat a lot of food and burn that fuel to keep our body temperatures at a constant set point. So we have to eat all the time. During the day, an ectotherm will use anywhere from maybe 1/7 to 1/10 of the amount of energy of a mammal about the same size. So talking maybe about a big gray squirrel or something compared to these painted turtles. They use about 1/10 of the energy. And then, of course, at night, the turtles cool down, and which makes them even more efficient. They'll just cool down with the temperature of the water at night. And so if you put that all together, overall, they use only about 3% of the energy that a mammal or a bird would, of approximately the same size. So that's a big increase in efficiency compared to us warm-blooded creatures. So snapping turtle is another fairly common turtle, and actually maybe the most common turtle in Vermont, and perhaps even the most widespread. But it doesn't bask in large numbers, and it doesn't bask in the open. It often basks in shallow water, or more usually basks in shallow water. Once in a while, you'll see it actually haul out entirely on land. But a lot of the time, all it needs is some warm, shallow water to use. it's got no particular colorful field marks on it, and that actually is one of its field marks. It has no reds or yellows or stripes or spots, kind of a dull coloration. It gets particularly big, and our record in Vermont is up to about an 18-inch shell or carapace. I hear all the time stories about giant snapping turtles that barely fit into a wheelbarrow. But what you have to keep in mind is that if you have an 18-inch shell, you may have a 16-inch tail and a 16-inch neck. And so the whole turtle really is an impressive sight that might be the size of a small alligator once you start adding, once you add in the length of the head and the tail. Here we this turtle excavating, this mama turtle, and that's what most people see in May through June. They see the females as they come out searching for a place to lay their eggs. Sadly for turtles, one of those places that has loose soil, lots of sun, and fairly easy digging are the edges of roads or edges of driveways even. And so to access these spots, these turtles are often putting themselves in danger on the road surface. I mean, they have evolved to be well protected against almost all predators, with the exception of otters, which are just too smart and powerful to give up a big meal like that. But cars, trucks are something they have not evolved to handle, and sadly, they often get hit in roads. Here we see their typical rounded eggs laid. They dig with their hind legs. They dig a flask-shaped hole and deposit the eggs in them, and then bury them, and often dump some water on top of it from their bladder. And where they laid their eggs could be almost impossible to find, unless, of course, you are a predator. So turtles don't have teeth. You could say they have a beak, more like a bird, but they can give you a painful bite. And one of them, this guy, the snapping turtle on the right, can actually bite well enough so that it could be dangerous in terms of doing damage to a finger. Now, there's all kinds of folklore out there about snapping turtles that, bit through somebody's canoe paddle or the handle of a broomstick or something like that. But it would have to be a pretty wimpy broomstick for a snapping turtle to bite through it. That said, our flesh on a finger is pretty wimpy. And so I have seen researchers that were taking snapping turtles out of traps and not paying attention to where all their heads were, and bites that they have received on their fingers. And they were nasty bites. They didn't go through the bone, but they went to the bone. So you do want to make sure that if you handle a snapping turtle, that you keep your hands at least as far away from the head of a snapping turtle as the length of the shell. So if the shell is about 12 inches long, then keep in mind that it can reach about 12 inches, and keep your fingers that far away. There are ways to handle snapping turtles safely, and I will show you that. This is the only way that I recommend holding a snapping turtle. You get around behind it, and they may not want you to do that. They may turn around and face you, but you're faster and smarter than they are, and you can do that. And then when you get around behind, you reach in and you grab the base of their hind legs, which are big and thick and strong. And you can hold them by the base of the hind legs, obviously with the head facing away from your legs and knees. You don't want to handle a snapping turtle just by its tail. You can move a snapping turtle around on the ground if it's supporting itself with its tail to get it in a good position. But if you're going to pick it up, if you just pick it up by the tail, it puts too much pressure on the tail, and you will hear the spine popping where the vertebrae are actually separating because of all the weight, because they're particularly heavy turtle. We have records of the snapping turtle again from almost all towns in Vermont, except they become harder to find in the mountain towns. These mountains down here in the south are Somerset and Stratton, and there are just fewer warm, mucky-bottomed marshes in these sorts of habitats. But still, we've found snapping turtles up to about 2,000 feet in elevation. So I suspect that you could still find us a snapping turtle in many of these towns. And if you were to, please do take a photo and send us a report. We'd really appreciate it. We've made special trips to Somerset, a number of special trips to Somerset. And interestingly enough, we have found no turtles of any species in that mountain town. Here's a little town, a little turtle that most people would either confuse for a small snapper or are just totally unaware that we have this in our state at all. It's called the eastern musk turtle. That is full size for an eastern musk turtle, only about 4 inches long. That's an adult. Smooth, rounded carapace, kind of a thick head, with these 2 white stripes along each side of the head. And if you look underneath the chin or underneath the legs, you can see what are called tubercles, little fleshy extensions. And these are another good field mark for this little musk turtle. We have very few areas in the state where we have populations of musk turtles. And if you look at this map, you'll see down here in the southern end of Lake Champlain, in the shallower southern end, in the Bombazine and Hortonia drainage. These are historic records, so we haven't had any records in these areas for more than 25 years. This, if we put a T there, we think it's likely transported and released, but perhaps as part of a native population. But people do move turtles around. And then up here, we come into the Mallets Bay and the North Lake shallow waters again that are warm and shallow and weedy. And we start to see this turtle again. But in particular, Niquette Bay State Park, Mallets Bay is a strong population and a good place to see this turtle if you'd really like to find it. But still, we'd love to get records from any of the rest of perhaps the North Lake or other parts of Lake Champlain. Other than that, I don't expect to find it anywhere in Vermont. We should look a little bit at how turtles are put together. And here on the left is a wood turtle carapace. And we can see in this particular turtle, this wood turtles don't shed their scutes. These are scutes. And they don't shed them. And so when they grow a new one as they age, the new one grows up underneath the old one. And you get this stack of scutes. You can see all the rings, all the new rings from the growth of new scutes. And it forms a kind of a flattened pyramid that makes the shell very, very strong, which makes sense because the wood turtle wanders around on land and needs that kind of protection as opposed to being in water most of the time. But I want you to see that these scutes, as the shell dries out, these scutes will fall off in a dead turtle. And here we see the bone underneath the scute. In this spotted turtle shell here, we see that the scutes have fallen off, and you can see the bone, the bones that are underneath the scutes. And then here on this snapping turtle shell, you can see that the bones themselves are extensions of the ribs. Here's the ribs. And the bones that you were looking at previously are on on the back side of those ribs, behind those ribs, interconnecting on top of all the ribs. And the spine, of course, is what the spine and the ribs are what that carapace is formed out of. So, you know, when your kids see the turtle climbing out of its shell in the cartoons, you can point out to them that there is just no way that could happen. What's a fascinating thing to think about, I think, is that essentially turtles live inside an expanded rib cage. So if you could imagine pulling your head and your arms and your legs up inside your rib cage for protection whenever a predator showed up, that's what these guys are doing. They just have this huge expanded set of ribs that provides them protection. And then, of course, the plastron on the underside. So as some turtles grow, like painted turtles, unlike wood turtles, as they grow new scutes, the old scutes just peel off. And so just like in trees, these are called deciduous scutes, scutes that peel off. The wood turtle did not have deciduous scutes. It kept its old scutes and as a result had a thicker, stronger shell. Snapping turtle doesn't shed its scutes. As a result, on the snapping turtle, because it doesn't shed its scutes, you may see specific types of algae that are growing on the shell that don't get cleaned off. You're not going to see that on a painted turtle because when it sheds its scutes, any of that algae would come right off and they're going to look smooth and relatively clean. So let's stop there just for a second to see if we've accumulated any questions to this point. If not, we'll go right on. If we have, we'll take a second and answer any questions that have come up so far.
Indeed, we have 4 questions. The first one is, when do young painted turtles emerge in the spring, roughly? And then, do they ever emerge in the fall?
Yeah, great question. And we have seen painted turtles emerge in the fall here, even in Vermont, if we've had a particularly warm summer. And as you go further south, that becomes more and more common until you get down in an area like, let's say, where painted turtles would be expected to emerge every fall and not overwinter at all. But most of our turtles, you're not going to see coming out of the ground until April or May of the following year after they were laid, which means that you may have, if you have a nesting spot, you may have eggs or turtles in that nesting spot almost year round. Because by the time the young turtles are emerging, the adult turtles will be showing up on those same spots to dig holes and lay eggs again.
I have 2 questions that seem to be related, so I will say both of them, Jim, and then you can take it away. The first one is, do all clutches have both males and females, or do some have only one sex? The second part of that is, what is the evolutionary reason for temperature-dependent sex determination? And I'm glad I don't have to say that 3 times quickly.
As far as we know, all of the nests produce both males and females, but the ratio is altered based on the temperature. So more males, more females, depending on the temperature. It may be that with rapid climate change, we could get to a point or certain years, we could have all male or all female, which would be an issue. But still, other nests that were laid in other areas that were maybe cooler or warmer might provide more males, and another nest might provide more females. So hopefully that will happen. But as I'm sure you guys know, we should not be messing with the climate. Thing to do for all of us, including wildlife.
Are you
In
ready for
terms
another
of the
question?
evolutionary advantage, what's that?
Oh no, I didn't know if you were ready for another question. You let me know.
Well, the other part of that question was, what's the evolutionary advantage of having temperature
Actually, what
dependent?
is the evolutionary reason?
Okay, I guess I just got to say, I don't know. I really don't.
The next questions, two of them have to do with the scoots that you indicated to us. The first question is, when do turtles shed the scoots? And the second question about those are, let's see, where did it go? Well, let's just start with that. When do turtles shed the scoots? And how often do they grow another layer of scoots?
Well, that's gonna change depending on the rate of growth. So, excuse me. So little turtles growing quickly are going to have to shed their scoots multiple times in a year. An old adult turtle might shed their scoots only once in a year, and I can't really pin it down to any particular season or any particular time during the field season. I can't say that I've noticed it in one portion of the field season any more than another. Just when the turtle has grown enough, put on enough growth to put some pressure, upward pressure on those scoots, they start peeling off. And they don't all come off at once. They come off over a period of months.
We have a lot of questions, so we're going to take two or three, and then perhaps up to you to move on. This person is asked, this is actually the fourth question from the same person. Did I hear correctly that otters can prey on snapping turtles?
Yeah, that's true. Otters are fast enough, smart enough, powerful enough that they can eat snapping turtles. They have to work their way in, and I've sadly seen many turtles that are missing, little snack, missing one leg. Painted turtles often missing a couple legs. But if an otter really gets serious, and by the way, those injuries could be the result of a raccoon or a mink or a fisher that just was able to get their teeth on one of the legs. But the otter is just plain strong enough so that it can chew its way into the shell. But I personally have only run into one otter chewed snapping turtle, but I know of a researcher in Canada whose research site was raided by a family of otters, and many of the snapping turtles were killed.
The next question is quite specific to the neonate turtles before they come out. What specific things do the neonate turtles eat once their yolk sacs are absorbed?
Well, based on my experience, I think they're primarily in very, very shallow water. So a friend of mine, state biologist Steve Perrin, refers to baby turtles as Oreos with legs. Baby turtles have flexible shells, and almost anything, even a grackle or a blue jay could eat a baby turtle pretty successfully. So they have to hide, and they hide in abundant vegetation. That's one of the reasons that you find turtles in bodies of water that have emergent vegetation. If you're somebody that likes a fairly sterile man-made pond in the yard, you probably won't have that many turtles in it. But if you have places for the little turtles to hide in the vegetation around the edges, then you have provided protection. And so these little turtles are eating what's in there. So dragonfly larvae, little worms that get washed in, fly larvae, beetle larvae, anything that moves, but also they're omnivores. So they're also eating a certain amount of vegetative matter as well.
Two more questions, and then it's away with your next part of your presentation. This is about the eastern musk turtle. What is the function of the musk feature on that eastern musk turtle?
Well, you know, the truth of the matter is that most of these turtles can produce musk. And you don't think about that much. If you're somebody who's handled snakes, then you do think about it, because you know that snakes can release a pretty foul smelling defensive musk. But turtles can too, and it comes from the edge of the underside of the plastron. And snapping turtles can release that, and this spiny soft shell that you're looking at. But sadly, musk turtles got named after their musk. And I'll admit that it can be pretty strong smelling. They don't always release it, but it's a defensive chemical, and it does smell pretty bad when they decide to pump it out.
The last question we have is, which turtles were protected by having a special sunning platform built in northern Lake Champlain during the construction of a large bridge years ago?
That was this turtle that we're looking at right here. This is a spiny softshell. And that new bridge was built to replace the old one. And it was brought to our attention by Canadian researchers that all of the Quebec turtles overwintered in the channel created between the two ends of the causeway that supported the bridge. So all the Canadian turtles, these guys travel a big distance, swam to that channel and overwintered there. And so they raised that concern. And so we made sure, while constructing the new bridge, that the turtles had adequate basking, and we created rafts for that so that they could bask. And even after the bridge was installed, we made sure that there was basking that extended south from the new bridge, because unfortunately the new bridge shades a lot of the old basking areas that once existed. So those rafts were created for spiny softshells, but map turtles and other turtles moved right in and used those as well.
That's great. So we are done with the questions, and we will be answering questions at another part of the presentation. So away we go.
All right, this is a little spiny softshell, and you know, we were just talking about scoots, but this guy just doesn't have scoots. It's a smooth, leathery, flexible shell, and you can see its long, pointed nose that looks like a snorkel and actually works like a snorkel. You can see the stripes on its head, which are good identifying characteristics. And here we see the stripes again. We see that pointed snout. Look at the nostrils here, the paired nostrils. Why it's called spiny is there is another soft shell that is the smooth soft shell, and the spines in the name refer to just these little bumps here. Spines, short little bumps on the leading edge of the carapace that give it its name. Now, this particular turtle is a protected species in Vermont and Canada and in the province of Quebec, because it has very limited distribution, and it is associated historically with deltas, the Winooski River Delta, the Lamoille River Delta, and the Missisquoi River Delta. Now, those in the Winooski River have disappeared as far as we can tell, though one turtle was sighted in that area fairly recently. But the two northern populations associated with Winooski River Delta and the Lamoille River Delta are getting lots of attention from Steve Perrin, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, to protect their nesting habitat, and hopefully are generating a lot of new young that will successfully keep that population going. This is one of our two species, like it says down at the bottom of the screen, that have genetic sex determination rather than temperature dependent sex determination. Here is this turtle actually using its snorkel, which is really pretty cool. They will bury themselves in the shallows along Lake Champlain. And then if they feel they need a little oxygen, they can extend their necks up, just stick their little snout out into the air, get some oxygen, and then pull back in and wait for a crayfish or maybe a tadpole or something like that to eat. This shows the size differences between the males and the females. It's just an amazing thing to see. This is a little male, maybe 6 or 7 inches long. This is a full-grown female that may be about the size of a manhole cover. And it makes some sense when you think about it, in that the eggs are developed inside this body. And if she's going to lay a bunch of eggs, she needs some space, where all this little guy has to do is produce some sperm, and they don't take nearly as much room. So he could survive as a little bugger like this, and she gets quite big. Here's the bridge that one of the people that called in earlier, or that typed in the chat box earlier. This is the bridge, the new bridge from Swanton to Alberg, and this is the area where the turtles were overwintering. And you can see here the artificial basking that was created. It was extended off the old causeway. Some of the causeway was removed on this side, but most of the old causeway still exists, and it still forms the channel that is essentially like a big river where these guys like to overwinter. So speaking of overwintering, how can a creature that breathes oxygen spend the winter underwater? Well, first off, their temperature cools down with the water. So they're cooling down. And actually, if you look carefully, see the painted turtle in there, down underneath the ice? Their temperature cools down. So their body temperature, is probably about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And so they have a lot less oxygen demand to begin with, but still they're not going to get any oxygen from the air. So where do they get their oxygen? Well, they can take oxygen, a certain amount of it, extra pulmonary oxygen intake, from the lining of their mouth, from thin skin in certain areas of their body, throat, and in some turtles, the sacs around their cloaca, we'd be thinking anus here, that are thin-skinned and can absorb oxygen from the water. But if they don't get enough oxygen, which is still possible, they're going to go anaerobic, and they're going to develop lactic acid, which is a problem. If they get too acidic, they could die. And so they buffer the acid by taking calcium, the blood and the lymph, taking calcium from the shell, dissolving parts of the shell to buffer the acid. Now, 2 of our turtles are particularly tough in terms of being able to withstand low dissolved oxygen. And you can probably guess which ones those are, because they're the most widespread: painted turtles and snapping turtles. But when we were doing the study on the spiny softshell turtles up near the bridge, we found that they were pretty smart. And once we caught them once in a trap, that it was very, very difficult to catch them again. So what we had to do in order to change the transmitters that they were carrying is we had to send divers down in that area that we were just talking about to find the turtles on the bottom of the lake when they were cold and couldn't move very fast, to bring the turtles up. And the turtles that were down there were under the sediment with only their snout sticking out. So there's no way that they were taking in oxygen either through their skin, because there's not dissolved oxygen in that soil, or very, very little. So there's no way they were taking in oxygen through their skin. But when they would open their mouths, look at this. I mean, you look right in their mouths and you can see that the inside of their mouths and throat are just lined with capillaries, looking bright red here. So they're taking in oxygen from their snout into their mouth, and whatever oxygen demands they need, hopefully, are met by just what they can take out of the water through the lining of their mouth and throat. Here's a spiny softshell laying her eggs on the beach. And this is one of the limiting factors now for spiny softshells, is that the amount of beach that we don't use it for human use, is smaller and smaller. And there's a lot of artificial shoreline, either riprap or lawn, that is taking up a fairly significant percentage of the shoreline in the North Lake. And so one of the Fish and Wildlife's activities is maintaining the shoreline so that they continue to have egg nesting habitat. But there's another big problem there, and that is where there are humans, there are more raccoons than usual. We subsidize raccoons. We provide them cover, we provide them garbage, we provide them food in the compost piles, we provide them bird feeders, and so the raccoon numbers are bigger, and nest predation, everybody loves eggs, and turtle eggs are no exception. Nest predation is particularly high in these areas, averaging about 70% of the nests get dug up and the young eaten. And so for the spiny softshells, one of the things that Fish and Wildlife is doing is covering the area where they have nested after the turtles have finished nesting with this turkey wire, so that the raccoons and the skunks and the coyotes and the foxes can't dig up the nests. But when the turtles are ready to leave, the turtles are small enough to actually get through the opening and out and then back into the water. This little turtle here is actually a map turtle, not a spiny softshell. So here's the very limited distribution of the spiny softshell turtle in Vermont, with one record way down here in Ferrisburg of an individual, but the populations that we know of are in these river deltas, only on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain, on the north end of the lake, and continuing into Quebec. Here's the map turtle that I mentioned earlier. We saw huge numbers of these guys basking along Lake Champlain. It is only a Lake Champlain turtle, not found in anywhere else in New England, but it also is in the Great Lakes. And many of you probably realize that Lake Champlain, at least biologically and ecologically, is a Great Lake. It's part of the same watershed. And so the species that we find, the fish and the turtles in Lake Champlain, are the same species that you would find in the Great Lakes. There was an effort at one time to name Lake Champlain a Great Lake in order to get some of the same funding, but the people that lived by the larger Great Lakes didn't like that idea. So we now are able to get the funding, but we can't call Lake Champlain a Great Lake, even though ecologically it is part of the same drainage. So look at the map turtle, look at the keel, look at the stripes on the head that might make you think painted turtle, but this is a larger turtle, keeled shell, darker shell, kind of a grayish green. You can see some of the map markings here. I'll show you more later. But you can also see that it has teeth on the posterior end of its carapace, rather than smooth like a painted turtle would be, or a musk turtle. If this were a painted turtle, this would be shiny and quite dark, rather than this dirty gray color. Here we have another one basking. Look for the teeth again, look for the keel. We see stripes on the neck, but we don't see any of the red that you see at the base of the neck and the base of the legs on a painted turtle. Here's a young map turtle that shows you how they get that name. This is supposed to look like a topographic map, the topographic lines on a topographic map. Now this gets harder and harder to see as the turtles age, but this is just a little baby. See the keel, see the teeth. Here's the distribution of the map turtle going right along Lake Champlain. There are only a couple Lake Champlain towns where we have not been able to document a map turtle. Any of you people that live in the Burlington area, keep your eyes open in South Burlington. We haven't been able to document a map turtle from South Burlington for more than 25 years. Bridport. And let me think, what would this be? Oh, this has got to be South Burlington. And I'm not sure what town this is up here. Here's a wood turtle, black head, orange, yellow, or red tint on the legs. You can see that it has pyramidal scutes with these growth rings. So this is a stack of scutes glued together. It has some unusual threats because it's a river turtle. It's not a pond or a lake turtle, it's a river turtle. And we have, and it spends most of its time feeding on land. It is more exposed to road traffic, to humans, to agricultural equipment, and exposed to collection for the illegal pet trade. They have a price on their head, and sadly, they can get collected and sold. It's not legal, but it still happens. Here we see the plastron of the wood turtle, and it's very, very helpful to see the plastron in terms of seeing characteristics, field marks. We can see that it has a yellow plastron with these black markings on the outer edges of each of the scutes. That is a great field mark for this one, spotted turtle and Blanding's turtle. And if you notice, this one has a concave plastron. It's hollowed out a little bit here, and that is to make it fit a little bit better on top of a female for mating purposes. And you can tell males from females by looking for that concave plastron. Here's a wood turtle, female wood turtle, digging to lay her eggs. And this brings up an important point. And wood turtles take up to 14 years before they can lay eggs. And so if the mortality of wood turtles is common enough that very few of them make it to 14 years old, then the populations obviously are going to disappear. They lay relatively few eggs, and the reason that populations survive over time is because of the long life of the adult female, that she just keeps trying to lay eggs year after year after year after year. And even if lots of them are eaten by predators, she's at least going to be able over time to replace herself in that population. So for turtles, for the ability of adult turtles to live a long life is critical to the maintenance of the population. So there are really no turtles where an open season on adults could be sustained. You can't lose adult turtles regularly at a high rate anyhow and maintain a population. Sadly, here's an adult turtle that was crossing Route 30 and was hitting the road. Roads are a large source of mortality for all turtles. And here you can see essentially where we have, imagine a trout stream, but not the steep, high elevation trout stream, but where it starts to get a little bigger, wider, and starts to meander a little bit. And so where we have those meandering trout streams that are deep enough for a turtle to overwinter, you could have wood turtles. And they actually are quite widespread in Vermont, but we don't like to advertise specific locations or specific rivers because we're afraid people might come in there and collect them illegally. Here's one of the rarest of our turtles, the spotted turtle. And you can see, as its name implies, black, smooth shell, smooth all the way around the edge, no teeth, very small, maybe 4 inches, with yellow spots on the shell and yellow spots on the neck and head. And this is a wetland species that likes extensive fen or bog habitat, where it can move around in very, very shallow water in those extensive wetlands. It estivates when things get a little too hot and dry in late summer, and it likes to move from shallow waters or deeper waters where it overwinters waters to eat the eggs of amphibians and salamanders in the early spring. So when we map this particular turtle, we show you the counties. We don't even show you the towns because, again, this one has a price on its head and is collected and sold illegally. We have one pretty good population in Addison County that existed pretty much under our noses for years before we found it. And then a couple weak populations of a handful of turtles in the southern 2 counties in Vermont. It's an endangered species, S1, which is the rarest ranking of a state heritage rank, 5 being the most common, and a high priority conservation species, high priority SGCN, species of greatest conservation need. Let me stop there, and then we'll finish. We'll take some questions, and then we'll go to the end and take some questions again.
Great, thank you very much, Jim. We have 3 or 4 questions. The first one being, do other species of turtles besides spiny softshells have size differences between males and females?
Yeah, but the sexual dimorphism, that's what it's referred to, is strongest in the spiny softshell turtles. You will see that female painted turtles are a little bit, maybe an inch or 2 larger than the males, and you'll see similar size differences, but relatively small size differences in some of the other turtles that we have. It's by far the most pronounced in the spiny softshell.
What is the sexual maturity of the other species of turtles?
Some of the turtles mature a lot faster, like the painted turtle. And I don't remember the actual number of years, but let me throw out maybe a few years. Other turtles, like box turtles, that can live, some reports on box turtles, 100 years, can take longer to mature. Even actually some of our snakes, like the timber rattlesnake, takes about 9 years to become sexually mature.
The next question is about the spiny softshells. Why do you think that they are not found on the New York side of Lake Champlain?
I think that's really what the shoreline looks like, that we have the big, slow deltas that deposit sand and silt, and there's nothing really comparable to the Missisquoi River Delta or the Lamoille River Delta over on the New York State side. They're more trout-like streams. They're faster, they're rockier bottom, rocky and sandy, and they also don't have the extended shallow waters that we see on the east side of Lake Champlain that warm up quickly.
Are spotted turtles endangered everywhere or just in Vermont?
As you go further south, they become more common. They're protected south of us in Massachusetts, but as you go further south, they become more common. So they're among the rarest here on the northern edge of the range and become more common as you go south.
So that kind of brings us to climate change. The next question says, are changes in the distribution of the species anticipated with climate change?
Yeah, I think so. But the question is, can they adjust fast enough? Will they be able to successfully move across the barriers that we have created? And in this case, I'm not necessarily talking about a Lake Champlain turtle, but a more terrestrial turtle. Will it be able to get from one pond or wetland across the road, through the housing complex, and travel north to establish itself in a slightly different population? So, yeah, I think we will see changes, but exactly what those changes will be and how successful the turtles will be in adapting to those temperature changes is hard to predict.
The next and last question on this section of your incredible talk is, we live in Chittenden County and see a lot of painted turtles on the roads in the late summer, in the late spring and early summer. Is it best to move it to the side of the road in the direction it is headed, or to pick it up and move it to the closest pond or lake? What is the best thing to do when one sees a turtle in the road?
You should always move it in the direction that it's headed. If you take it back and put it in the pond, then it's just going to turn around and come back across the road when you're not looking. The turtle knows where it's trying to get. And so, as dangerous as it may look, just help it across the road and get it to a safe spot on the other side of the road. Although, be careful. We have heard of one mortality of a young child that ran out into the road to try to catch and move a turtle and was hit by traffic. That wasn't in Vermont, that was in Florida. But, you know, the urge to save a turtle is laudable, but don't injure yourself while doing it.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions we have currently.
Okay. So we have some hypothetical species in Vermont, and we just argued in a meeting of the Reptile Amphibian Scientific Advisory Group that this turtle that we have considered hypothetical, the eastern box turtle, we really should call part of our native fauna. We have not in the past. We've been watching the records, but there is a real local pattern of records in Windham County, Brattleboro, Putney area that really look like they must be native turtles. Why would we be questioning that? Well, most terrestrial turtles are often kidnapped and kept as pets and moved around on the landscape. And so a turtle that shows up, for instance, a record, say, from the Middlebury College campus or the Linden College campus is a turtle we suspect that a student let go, which they shouldn't do. Once a turtle's taken in a pet turtle, legal pet turtle, let me say, you should keep it as a pet and you should find a new pet home for it. But some people let them go. And so sometimes we end up with non-native box turtles that have been released in places. But we're starting to see patterns that suggest that the eastern box turtle is really a particularly rare but native species, and particularly right here in southeastern Vermont. And this is only about 25 miles north of the next population, known native population in Massachusetts. So we're proposing that we add this species to the list of native species. Look up here, we have another cluster of turtle records. Now we have labeled these as likely transported by humans, but boy, we don't know that for sure. Is it possible that there are the remnants of another native population up here along this river drainage? Yeah, it is. But we're going to have to get some genetic information before we can tell that for sure, one way or another. There are some other non-natives that show up, and these are concerns because as the climate warms, people's favorite pet turtle, the red-eared slider, sometimes gets released. And south of us, it can survive and compete with the native species. And so as our climate warms, we're getting more and more records of this southern turtle that was released and is surviving through our winters. Most southern turtles could not survive this far north, and the first winter that they ran into would kill them. But this guy can survive, and so it is a concern that too many of these have been released. Another problem with releasing non-native turtles is that they may have picked up some diseases, parasites, etc. on the way, or even in an aquarium or in a pet store, and that when you release it to the wild, they can transmit those diseases and parasites to the native species. So if you have a pet, I hope it's legal, and if it is legal, keep it, even though it may outlast you. You know, it may outlast your interest. Okay, then find another good home for it. We haven't had trouble with this particular import, but I thought that one was classy enough to show to you. You probably have a rough idea now of this general abundance table. The really most common turtles being up top, painted and snapping. Wood turtle, pretty widespread here in Vermont. Map turtle, just Lake Champlain, so not as common. Musk turtle, way more localized. Box turtle, even though we still haven't called it a native species, we're still considering it hypothetical, right down here at third from the bottom. Spotted turtle, and then spiny softshell at the bottom. And here, over here on the right, we have their priority list, high priority conservation, endangered, spotted turtle, threatened, spiny softshell. Sizes ranging from our littlest turtle, only a little bit, over 4 inches, 4.5 inches, up to our largest turtle, the snapping turtle, showing you the relative size. Map turtle is really a pretty big turtle, quite a bit bigger than painted. Many of them overlapping with the smaller, medium-sized snapping turtles. To come to some of the concerns, all species, the primary concerns, conservation issues, are habitat loss, that we just build on it or build a road on it or pave it over. Habitat fragmentation, that we divide the habitat into smaller and smaller blocks of habitat that are separated by areas that would be hard for wildlife to move through. And then habitat degradation, and that could include climate change, pesticides, siltation, a variety of other issues that they have to deal with. You may recognize this area. This is Essex Five Corners. We've created all sorts of other barriers for turtles too. This kind of dead end for a poor little painted turtle that's trying to get across. He is now stuck on this road and will not be able to get up and over that particular barrier. Railroad tracks can be a real barrier. Now, the snapping turtles are big enough, or if they're big enough, they can get up and over a rail. But what happened to this one is pretty obvious. It got chopped in half when a train came through. But smaller turtles, like painted turtles and spotted turtles, have a real hard time getting over these rails. And so even if they are somehow successful in getting over this rail and getting in the middle, they are often trapped in the middle where predators can find them easily, or they may over time just dry out, dehydrate, and die. And I spent I'm doing some work for the National Resource Conservation Services right now, and there's one area where they've recreated a wetland that's right along a railroad track, and many dead turtles along the railroad track. Now, recently, to their credit, Fish and Wildlife and the Agency of Transportation have created turtle underpasses, where essentially what you do is you remove all this rock ballast between two ties, and you allow the turtles to crawl under the rails. Hopefully, they will become standard in the future. So it's kind of a summary of some of the basic threats. Almost 50% of turtles worldwide are threatened. It's a larger percentage than any other reptile or amphibian group. 50% threatened. In addition to habitat loss and degradation, commercial and private collection of turtles for food. Now there's an Asian tradition of eating turtles for food. And so most of that threat is actually not in Vermont, but is in Asian, on the Asian continent. But there still are collectors who collect turtles, take them to the cities, and sell them in food markets to the dense Asian populations that are in some of those areas where a turtle is just a traditional food source. 3 of Vermont's 7 species of turtle are considered high priority conservation species. Spiny softshell, sticking its neck out here for you. Spotted turtle, wood turtle on the right. So loss of habitat, let's just talk about that a little bit. And we make a lot of assumptions about what has to happen to keep our economy going. And as a result of some of those assumptions, we consume in Vermont land at the rate of about 75 square miles per decade. That's about the size of the greater Burlington area. We just can't continue to do that and expect to maintain healthy working ecosystems. We have got to be talking to ecological economists, and we've got to be educating our traditional economists on ecology. I'll point out, this may sound a little funny, but one species on this planet has claimed all the land for its own, and that's us. And if these other species are going to survive, we've got to be watching out for their needs. They can't do it on their own. So if you see stuff that seems interesting, out of place, might fill in a data gap, might be unusual, please do take a photo and report your sightings. You can either report them directly to me through my email address or through our website. Take a visit on our website. We just added a huge amount of video material to our website, and we're really proud of that. So that's all the information that I am going to present. So now we'll take the final set of questions that we might have.
Great. We have a few. And let me remind everybody who is still with us that this presentation within 2 days will be on, it is being recorded, will be edited, and will be on the Green Mountain Audubon website. So you can either see it there or refer people to see it there. Which turtles are you really interested in having us report to you?
Well, when of the more unusual species. So if you were ever to see a spotted turtle, or if you were to see a wood turtle, spiny softshell, all of those, any sighting that you would have would be worth reporting. Otherwise, for the more common turtles like the S5s, I would look at our maps and on our website. And on our website, we have a table that you can search, and it tells you what records we are missing from certain towns, and whether you could check to see if we have a record, a photographic record of a snapping turtle like this beauty in front of us from the town where you're seeing it. And if we're not, then please do snap a photo and send it to us. I mean, when in doubt, take a photo. We'll take the record. But the valuable ones are the rare species and those that fill in distribution gaps.
We have a question, and it looks like we have a comment. Here's the question. What's the best way to move a big snapper that is too big to pick up?
Well, we showed you a picture earlier in the video of a large snapper, and really any snapper, if you can lift a 50-pound sack of grain, then you can lift any of our snappers, but they do get heavy. And but I think for most of them, you could do that hind leg approach. Get behind them, grab the base of the hind legs, make sure their head's facing away from you, and either pick them up, or if they're too heavy, then lift them as far as you can and then just drag them lightly across the road. I mean, you can also do other tricks. You can throw out maybe you've got a blanket or a rug or something in your car, or a large mat, and you can get the turtle on that and you can drag that piece of material to the other side of the road. But I think in most cases, you can grab those hind legs. If it's a smaller snapping turtle, you can even grab the back of the shell with your hands, the back edge. Okay, remember, keep your hands toward the back edge, and pick them up that way.
This last person has twice typed this in, and it really is not a question. This person would like us to have your comments on mentioning that to carry a sheet of cardboard in our cars to help snapping turtles across the road.
Yeah, sure, that would work. A big piece of cardboard, if you could get the turtle on the cardboard, and then you could drag the cardboard across the road.
Jim, it is 7:48. To you, I want to offer our thanks from the Green Mountain Audubon Society. This has been a really, really interesting. I think it's going to end up being a very popular program for us to see. I thank all of those of you who have attended tonight. Check our website for what we have coming up. For example, Mav Kim is doing her fourth and last program, April 11th. Jim, once again, I learned a lot. I didn't know almost anything about this. You kept our interest, and we really appreciate it. And I'm going to say goodbye to Jim and goodbye to everybody else and end the program. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye, Jim.
Bye-bye.